Well, good morning, church. It is good to see you today. I hope that you all have been doing well, staying warm. I know Rich already plugged it, but I'll also plug a couple things we have going on this week. One, tonight, join us for our Bible classes. We have some pretty incredible studies. I'm getting to teach again on Deuteronomy. We're going to be doing 10 Commandments as well as some other stuff in Deuteronomy tonight. I think it's going to be more interesting than you might think with Deuteronomy. A lot of people associate those Old Testament law books as being a little mundane, but there's specifically the passages we're using tonight are going to be some of the most quoted Old Testament passages by Jesus in the entire New Testament, which should be good. And secondly, caroling on Wednesday night. Now let me just say, when caroling was suggested for the Wednesday before Christmas last year, I did not want to go, okay? I'm a millennial. And the idea of somebody walking up and ringing my doorbell and singing to me on my porch really makes me cringe a little bit. But it was fantastic. It was so much fun last year. And the people that we did it with, they loved it. They were so blessed by it. They came out and stood in the 16-degree cold to listen last year. And it was so life-giving, just the words of the music, celebrating the light that Christ has brought into the world. And I let me challenge you, because I think for some of you it'll be more of a challenge than an invitation to join us this year and do that. Because I think you'd be surprised at how life-giving that can really be. And it's twice as warm this year. It's going to be 32 when we sing instead of 16. When we, back in 2017, the elders, me and Todd, now me and Sean, we started doing those daily devotionals. You know what I'm talking about, these devotionals that we type up. We send them out in email, if you've given us your email for that, or we post them on our Facebook page 5-6 days a week for a long time. And the very first year that we were doing that, I had the fortune of my designated day coming up on June 21st. Does anybody know what's special about June 21st?
My birthday.
Hey! I wrote all about Shay. No. So some of you might know. It's the longest day of the year. It was the longest day of Pam's life too, I'm sure. But you opened the door for that one. They were here last week. So June 21st is the longest day of the year. And so, it was a great opportunity for me to stop and write about a nice little devotion about filling the longest day of the year with just good, solid Christian living, right? Good, solid Christian living, charitable deeds, living this great ministerial life. Something along the lines of, if this is the longest day of the year, then may it be filled with the most amount of good. And I still really I like that little devotional I wrote 5 years ago. And if we ever have June 21st fall on a Sunday, I'm sure you'll get another extended version of that. But opposite of June 21st, opposite of the longest day of the year, opposite of that devotional, something is happening this week. Do you want to guess what that might be? Yeah, the shortest day of the year, or if you'd rather, the longest night of the year. And in the same way that we feel so much just life and joy by those long, bright summer days, I think the opposite is true, right? That on these short, cold days filled with long, extended nights, sometimes leads us to a feeling of defeat, doesn't it? Now, obviously, everyone's different. I know some people just revel in the winter months, and I did when I was younger more than I do now. But it is a scientific fact that people experience higher levels of depression and loneliness, fatigue, and even feelings of hopelessness in these winter months and in these long nights. And all those issues, it's interesting because they're internal, they're intangible, and yet it's this external physical darkness that seems to be driving those internal mental emotions and feelings this time of year, right? Darkness, in a very genuine sense, affects us, right? Darkness affects us. And what I think I'm personally realizing, and this season is continuing to show me, is that the seasonal phenomenon of a lack of sunshine and continuous cold, which contributes to this mental illness, the same thing is true of spiritual darkness. And the same thing is true on a spiritual level as well. That when a blanket of darkness that is heavy and that is long-lasting drapes over our lives, that drapes over our communities, our families, even the world at large, we are easily weighed down to the point of these spiritual maladies as well. spiritual depression and spiritual loneliness, spiritual hopelessness, all brought on by this constant, heavy darkness that we see in our world. Well, wouldn't you say that's true? I think that in the same way that the physical darkness of winter often leads to mental health issues, spiritual darkness that lingers over our world leads to spiritual health issues. And I'd be lying if I didn't think that we were in that exact case over the last handful of years, right? It's exactly what we've been seeing for a couple years now. Vitriol politics, a steady stream of injustices everywhere you look, unimaginable death tolls from a literal once-in-a-century type of pandemic, families and friendships breaking apart because of petty partisan issues, apparent loss of factual truth in the midst of a bunch of misinformation. Doesn't it just feel heavy thinking about all that? And yet that is what has defined our months on months now, those kind of things. You turn on the news, there's never anything happy going on. It's this kind of spiritual darkness that's lingering over our world. And if it hasn't been a dark, long night of the soul, I don't really know what would be, right? 2020 through 2022. And with it has unsurprisingly come about a lot of spiritual fatigue. People are just crushed by this darkness, that their faith is almost stamped out. So many people I know who feel defeated, who have given up the willpower to come together and be with the church throughout the week, who have abandoned their prayer life, who haven't opened a Bible in months, and more or less just succumbed to the hopelessness of this darkness that we've been living in. You don't know how many one-on-one conversations I've had with people over the last couple years who are just simply worn out by this darkness, right? Especially being in pastoral ministry. That's the kind of stuff I'm seeing on a daily basis all the time. And to be completely vulnerable with you, I've experienced a lot of episodes myself. Over the last couple years, there's been a lot of spiritual hardship. There's been a lot of spiritual darkness, and it has just made my soul weary, where I'm just sitting there at my desk during the week sometimes wondering, how we move forward from this. It's been a burdensome time for the people of God, hasn't it? And beyond just the people of God, because spiritual darkness doesn't just affect you if you only believe. It affects everyone. But what I have to remind myself of, and what I think we all need to remember in these hard times, is that the darkness is not invincible, right? Darkness is not invincible. It might swallow up swords. It might swallow up armies by the thousands, but it does have one specific weakness, and it's an obvious one, right? That's something we learned from the very beginning before we even have words to talk. The darkness is defeated by the light. As dense as the darkness may be, the smallest light can penetrate it in just disproportional depths. Light just slices up the darkness in incredible ways. And looking back at the literal winters that we experience, right? The literal winters that cause us so much, misery sometimes throughout the long nights. What do we use to turn around and make it a little bit more joyful, make it a little bit more better? Light, right? I don't particularly love coming after the time changes and driving back on to Sunday night services, Wednesday night services. It's not a lot of fun driving in the dark, but I will say driving through some of the neighborhoods where you see a lot of these Christmas lights, it helps. The fact that I can enjoy these beautiful displays of colorful lights that help kind of dispel the darkness and bring joy instead of sadness that comes with it. It works. It penetrates and dispels the darkness. It's not sunshine. It doesn't make the night any shorter, but it does combat the darkness with a life-giving light. Or here's another good example we see this time of year, and I'll have to thank the Payton family for introducing me to this tradition, and I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I've come to kind of appreciate it and enjoy it. But in Sweden, they have this annual reenactment of Saint Lucia bringing light in the darkness. And so the story goes, in the early times, in the early centuries of the church, during the Roman persecutions where Christians were being hunted down and slaughtered by the dozens, by the hundreds, and if we're going to talk about a spiritual darkness, a time of spiritual darkness, that absolutely has got to be one of the most monumental ones in the history of the church. But we're told this story during those times of Lucia, or Lucy, if we bring it to modern terms, this strong, faithful woman in the church who would sneak food down to the Christian prisoners who were held down in the Roman catacombs, underground, being forced to live in the darkness to kind of snuff out their light as they were preparing to die. And the strong woman of faith would go down there and bring to them food. But to light her way in the darkness, she would wear this wreath and headband holding candles to light the way in the darkness. Now, hundreds of years later, a lot of Christians in Sweden, and apparently in Centerville, or the occasional Centerville neighborhood, we remember her godly example by delivering food to those in need and using a wreath of light to bring literal light into the literal darkest nights of the year. In the evil of darkness, light has always been what brings life. And our God has constantly been a God of light. Whenever we read about darkness in the Bible and in the story of God, he has never failed to step into that darkness and provide light. Just consider the opening words of the Bible, right? Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. And I think just in our own lives, one of the reasons we find darkness to be so draining and light to be so reinvigorating is because darkness, to an extent, is that which exists outside the realm of God, right? It's that which exists before God's actions or without God's actions. Before God did anything, there was darkness. And at the end of times, when he has completed and made everything perfect, how will it be? You remember this? We read this chapter just a couple weeks ago for a different lesson. Last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22, describing those final days and those final times. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun even, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. Our God is the God of light. And in him, there is eternal day, where the darkness cannot squeeze us out. But as we so often say, between the darkness in the beginning, the full darkness of the beginning, and the full light in the end, where are we? We're right here in the middle, in a world that has both day and night, don't we? We live in a world that has the hands of Satan and the hands of God working wonders in it. And sadly, like we started out saying, Satan's influence is a powerful influence, isn't it? The kingdom of darkness is not insignificant in our world today. Paul even says in Ephesians 6 that we are up against rulers and powers of what he literally says is a dark world. They make it a dark world. And ever since humanity stepped outside of the Garden of Eden, we have been waiting for God to insert his light into this dark world, haven't we? Ever since the garden was to our west and we went east of Eden, right? We've been waiting for God to insert his light into a dark world. And that's exactly what he did. In fact, he put a very literal light in a very literal dark night. There was a star, a bright and shining star that he placed in the night sky to lead the way and provide light and guide people to a newborn baby that would himself be the much bigger and brighter light for the world. We read that in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jumping down a few verses to complete the thought. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who did believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. See, Jesus is the light. Exclusively, Jesus is the light. He is the light of God for all humanity. Jesus is the one who could dispel the darkness of our Satan in our world and bring light instead. In the darkness of pain, he is the light of healing. In the darkness of bitterness, he is the light of joy. In the darkness of division, he's the light of unity. In the darkness of violence, he's the light of peace. And in the darkness of death, which is Satan's largest darkness in this land, he is the light of resurrection. Jesus has broken into the darkness, and the darkness doesn't stand a chance. Jesus has broken into the darkness, and the darkness does not stand a chance. And because of that gospel truth, you and I, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. That night may be long, the darkness may weigh us down, but the light of God in Jesus Christ is available and is there to cast out that darkness. To cast out that darkness. So Jesus himself, that's said about Jesus in John 1. Jesus in John 8 says it himself. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Isn't that beautiful? That's a life-changing message. It is good, it is true, it is gospel. But if we're walking with Jesus in the light, why does it so often feel like it's dark still? Right? A lot of strong, faithful Christians who walk with Jesus, they still feel that darkness around them. I do. I imagine you do too. People who I believe are walking with Jesus still feel like it's pretty dark, even when Jesus says walking with him means walking in the light. There's a lot of things we could say here to answer that question, or to help us think about that question at least. We could dive into some deeper theological discussions to say that, well, hey, if you're following Jesus, then you're walking in his ways, which creates a path of light in the darkness, and it helps dispel the darkness by walking in his path. We could take it as an interpretive issue and say, oh, well, walking with Jesus is walking in godliness and not sinning, and that's the light versus the darkness. And like I said, there's a lot of directions we could go with this. But for this morning, what if we saw this verse? What if we saw the Gospels? What if we just saw the whole story of God as an invitation? Okay? I'm not going to try to answer that existential question of why does it still feel dark if we're told we're walking in the light. And we can have that conversation later. But instead, this morning, why don't we just see this and so many other passages in Scripture as an invitation to see the darkness around us that so often feels like a tomb, to see it instead as a womb instead of a tomb. God invites us, he is inviting us to see the darkness as a womb instead of a tomb. Darkness doesn't have to be the finale like the darkness of a tomb, right? The darkness that we live in does not have to be the finale of the darkness of a tomb. It doesn't have to have the last word. It doesn't have to claim all life and hope. Instead, it can be a womb in which we live in a darkness, sure, but and we may be confused and we may be hurt by that, but it's only a setup for a new and fuller life. Maybe we can understand the darkness around us as a setup for light on the other side. There's an old fable of two twins in the womb. And one of the twins is truly beat down by the conditions they live in. He says, it's dark in here, it's cramped, it's uncomfortable. What a painful and empty existence this dark womb is. And I'm sure that this is it. Right? There is nothing beyond the womb except for being cramped up in this uncomfortable, painful darkness. But the other twin says, I get your point. It is dark, it is uncomfortable here, but I think the darkness is only a precursor to something better. Because I can't help but sometimes hear the echo of a voice of a mother who sounds like maybe she loves me. I can't help but occasionally across my eyes there seems like there's a little bit of light that goes across the womb wall, and that I think there might be light on the other side. I feel muscles that occasionally contract and push me and pull me towards maybe that there's something waiting for us that'll move us into a better existence. And there they sat with those two different opinions of the darkness. You see, the darkness doesn't have to be a tomb. In it, we can see a womb that will eventually give way to God's deliverance into the light of a new and better life. You know, we live in a fallen world where we are surrounded by darkness. But you and I can face that darkness with our heads held high because we know that the darkness does not win, right? We can face the darkness with our head held high because we know that the darkness does not win. It is not the end result. It is not a tomb. God has an eternity of light that is waiting for us. And even while we battle through this world, we can trust that His Spirit, His Word in the Bible, His church can help us bring light into the darkness. And that's kind of my last challenge this morning, okay? Maybe you just need the encouragement this morning to remember that there is a dawn to this darkness, okay? Maybe you're just treading water, and you just have to be reminded that there is light. There is a dawn coming. There is an eternity of sunshine on the other side. And if that's what you need this morning, then may God bless you with that peace. But each of us here, when we're ready, are also called not just to enjoy the light, but to share the light as well, aren't we? That's Matthew 5:14, 5:14 and 16. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your God in heaven. It's kind of interesting. John 1 said that Jesus was the light. John 8 said that Jesus was the light. Matthew 5 says, you're the light. Well, if you have gotten close enough to know that light of Jesus, you are called to be a mirror, a reflector, a bearer of that light as well to other people. It isn't your light, but you get to be the light for the rest of the world. We must also step up to bear the light. We have a duty to reflect and to share the light of God to this dark world. It's not our light to hoard. As much as it does bless us, we're called to take that blessing and share it with others. And let me tell you, folks, there are people out there drowning in this darkness right now because they don't know the light. They haven't had the light, and they are just suffocating in the darkness that's out there. And they need us to go out there and share that light with them, because sadly, there's a whole lot of Christians out there in this world right now who are much more interested in putting out lights than bearing light, aren't there? I know we've all seen that. But we here at the Centerville Church of Christ are going to be a people who follow the example of Jesus, okay? Because this isn't just for us as Jesus' servants. So this is exactly what Jesus did, isn't it? He became the light that entered into the darkness. And now he has said, here, take my light, go with me as your light, and share it into the dark neighborhoods around you. And that's what we're called to do this morning. If you're here today and you're just beginning to open your eyes and see the light, maybe it's been so dark for so long you've closed your eyes and didn't even know they were closed. But if you're starting to see that light in the distance, just know it doesn't have to stay at a distance. You can draw close to that light. You can draw close to that warmth and see what's really out there beyond the darkness. We invite you to do that now as we stand and as we sing.